Will misguided legislation and misinformed movements set back 70 years of agricultural innovation? And will people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. be the catalyst to make that happen? That's what we're talking about in this episode of The Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of The Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field, then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. Got a great one for you today. It's a hot take, it's a hot topic, and I've got a hot guest. His name is Josh Miller, Dr. Josh Miller, very smart dude, bunches of degrees, genetics background that kind of came to agriculture from outside of agriculture. He's probably one of the biggest proponents of modern agriculture you're ever going to meet. We're talking about misinformed, misguided movements, both political, social, that are impacting our industry. You can look to the European Union, where I think it's actually more sinister than just misguided. I think that there's land grabs going on under the guise of environmentalism. There's maybe a move to create food scarcity, because therefore monies and control can be gained when you create scarcity. And we might be seeing that come to the United States of America. This came about in our discussion with my friend Josh, and he brought up the Robert F. Kennedy thing multiple times. If you're paying attention, and by golly, I hope you are, because we're right around this election time, lots of talk about setting back things that modern agriculture does under the idea of it's better for the environment, better for small farms, better for organic, etc. And we got to dig into all of this. Dr. Josh Miller, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, you've written a book called Peeling Back the Labels. This is a cool book. Lots and lots of good information in here. Some of it looks like you might have used my book, Food Fear, as a reference, but I'm not complaining, because you know what? You talked about GMOs, you talk about DDT, you talk about how the fact that the EPA banned DDT, if you don't know what we're talking about, dear friends, this went on in the early 70s, 50 years ago. You could say that the Environmental Protection Agency needed a boogeyman to justify its own existence and perpetuation, because it was a new temporary government agency. And if you know anything, you know there's no such thing as temporary government agencies. And for it to catapult itself into permanent existence and permanent budgetary allowances, it had to have a boogeyman. DDT became the boogeyman. It was the best insecticide that probably humans have ever invented. It was cheap. It was hugely effective. Saved millions and millions and millions of lives from malaria in developing or third world countries. It was sprinkled on as a powder, sprinkled on soldiers' heads in combat zones. Malaria, prior to DDT, killed more Marines in the South Pacific than Japanese bullets did. A lot of people don't know that. DDT got banned by the EPA because it was, as the EPA said, responsible for all of the bald eagle deaths. Actually, not a lot of scientific evidence to prove that, almost none. But if you want to keep your governmental agency moving, you've got to then have a symbol. From swastikas to flags to bald eagles, symbols are very powerful in creating human emotion. So the EPA latched on to America's symbol, the bald eagle, and said these bald eagles are going to go extinct, and it's because of DDT. This is just one misguided movement. Otherwise, the best insecticide that humans have ever invented, most effective, I should say, might still be around today. This is not a podcast about DDT. I'm just using that as an example. I'm going to throw it over to my man, Josh. That's just one great example you use here in Peeling Back the Labels, and I used in my book, Food Fear, of how movements are never based on science as much as they claim that they are.
Yeah, man, you really laid it out there pretty nicely. It's like you did write a book about that, didn't you?
I know what the hell I'm talking about around here, don't I, Josh?
Yeah, I didn't realize that coming in. No, I'm just joking. No, I think it's a great example, and we use it because it's so impactful and so in your face. And I lay a lot of the blame on this one, and maybe I was maybe a little too harsh on her. I don't know. But Rachel Carson, her book Silent Spring, that's really what spawned this movement, right? I mean, the EPA kind of came about because of her. But the idea of Silent Spring was killing all the birds or thinning the eggshells, so it was going to be Silent Springs. She was treated as a scientific revolutionary, although she was just really a good author. And pull at the emotive strings of people, but that became the thing that everybody could latch onto. And I think one of the important things that I like to highlight is you said I'm big into modern agriculture, and I am big into modern agriculture, all the advancements that we have. I actually argue, yes, DDT may still be around today, but only used in those cases that it needs to be used. It was already being reduced in the amount that it was used every single year. It was already on its way out, because today, it would not be registered today as an insecticide because of the selectivity, because of the persistence of it in the environment. That wouldn't meet the quality or the environmental fate standards that we have in place today.
Yeah.
But it was so impactful for saving lives back when it was around. Yeah. And it still could be used effectively. It's being used again. I mean, they're trying to bring it back to help squash some of these outbreaks that are still happening because it's so effective. So what you laid out there is exactly right. The movement came that we need to get rid of DDT, and it became that boogeyman. It was already on its way out because we're advancing all the time, but sometimes we let that fear get in the way of facts, and we just don't listen to what the real science and the real data has to say about these things.
And by the way, again, this is not an episode about DDT. It's
Sorry.
One of the many. No, I want to tell the listener. And by the way, if you're listening, you really ought to also be a viewer. I know I say this all the time. I'm trying to start to really work on my YouTube channel because I just haven't concentrated on it. You should be tuned into the YouTube channel. It's free. Just go to YouTube, type in Damian Mason channel, hit subscribe. You'll see that Josh is younger and better looking than me, and he wore a blazer to be on this show today. So he's right there. Anyway, Rachel Carson, I referenced it in my book, Food Fear, that it was 1962, I believe, her book came out. And yeah, she fashioned herself as a scientist. And of course, everyone thought that she was. And what's interesting is when they did the 50-year anniversary of her book, Silent Spring, and again, it got its name because she said, due to insecticide over-application, that we would wake up one day, walk out our doors, and it would be silent. The spring would be silent. There would be no songs of birds. The Audubon Society itself countered her after years of DDT usage and said, yeah, that's kind of bullshit. It's not happening. Actually, based on our bird counts, our ornithologists go out and do bird counts as well as our just followers that want to, and there's more bird activity today than there was when she wrote the damn book. So anyway, it was
those Christmas bird count studies.
It was devoid of actual facts, but it became a movement. And in fact, this is what I pointed out in my book. When the 50-year anniversary of her book, Silent Spring, came out, it said the literary work that started a movement. It doesn't say the scientific journal that chronicled bird, depopulations. It was the book, the literary work that started a movement. It's devoid of actual science. But the point is, we usually lose, as I say all the time, in agriculture when we use science. So back to this misguided movements. We're at it again, my friend Josh. It's happening right now from DDT to today, 2024.
Yeah, honestly, the reason I wrote the book was because of one of these topics. Was I was seeing this. Thank you for that plug, right there. Isn't that glorious? I designed that cover myself, by the way. I was walking through the grocery store aisle and I saw on an orange juice label. It was a Simply Orange label, and they've taken it off since then because obviously, I guess somebody found out it was nonsense. But they had this big green sticker on it that said non-GMO, and you may not understand why that irked me so bad, but there's no GMO variety of oranges available to us. Like, there are no GMOs. So they're just putting a sticker on there to drive fear against the technology. Like, hey, this is non-GMO. Well, all oranges are non-GMO, first off.
Right.
And it's even worse in the orange industry, because I actually work in the orange industry right now as well. And they've been battling citrus green for decades at this point. We're at a point where we're losing the Florida oranges. If you look at the orange juice, where the orange juice comes from for this country, they use the water pretty much from the oranges that come from Florida, but we're importing pulp and all the flavor from South America, from Central America because our oranges are so bad. We're desperately trying to save our oranges right now in Florida. And through any method possible, we're trying GMOs. So if that is the thing that finally comes to save us, we're already setting up the public to be scared of it for some reason, even though there's never been a reason to be scared of genetically modified foods or any organism whatsoever.
We're not, but pushers, well, for instance, the Non-GMO Verified Project, you covered it in your book, I covered it in my book. I compared it to organized crime, where the mob in New Jersey walks into your coffee shop or your pizza store and says, you need to pay for protection, and say, protection from what? I'm just fine. And they beat the shit out of you and break out your windows and said, well, you never know who's going to come in here and beat the shit out of you and tear out your windows. That's why you need to pay for protection. Then it becomes very obvious. Oh, I'm paying you this extortion to keep you from beating me up and busting up my windows. It's you that I'm paying to protect from you. That's kind of what the Non-GMO Verified thing does. They come in and say, there's a movement against GMOs. If you pay us to list your product as Non-GMO Verified, you'll get our sticker and the rights to use this because there's a movement against GMOs that could harm the sale of your products. And you say, I don't know about this movement that's going to harm the sale of my products. Oh, we're the movement that's going to harm the sale of your products. So give us the money. And it's the same thing.
As a colorful yet accurate example, I think I've never heard that put that way, but yeah, I like that. That little butterfly. You
Dr. Josh, you stick around with me, you're gonna realize I am the guy that delivers copious amounts of colorful, edgy examples within agriculture.
I like it. But you're right. I mean, there are today, as it stands, 13 crops that have genetically modified varieties of them. Sure. There's a lot more products on the shelves that have a non-GMO label than those that just carry those potentially 13 genetically modified organisms. I think I reference in there in the book some of the most outrageous, like non-GMO pink Himalayan sea salt or non-GMO like kitty litter. You know, come on, people. For the adults, there's even non-GMO condoms. I mean, I don't know what part of these things would be genetically modified, but you can rest assured they don't have them in those.
That's fantastic. And we can only hope the people that are dumb enough to pay a premium for non-GMO verified prophylactics are indeed not reproducing. So you see, it actually might end up being good for society.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, but then you're right. This is just the next movement. And one of the reasons why I thought it was important is because to highlight these is, you've said it before, even already since we've been talking, the story sells, right? And especially in agriculture, I feel like we try to tell our story through facts because there are facts on our side, but it doesn't pull at the emotive heartstrings at people. And so the narrative gets painted in a certain way and it creates fear, and fear sells too. And we've never played that game. And I don't think we need to play that game necessarily, but I do think that we need to be more informed about what the truth is. Yeah, that would the ideal audience for this book, honestly, was the everyday grocery shopper in a home, whether that's the husband or the wife, whoever's making the buying decisions for groceries. Read this so that you have more peace of mind when you order groceries from the grocery store, that you know that it's going to be safe. Interesting little side note here too. The editor I had for the book was from Oregon. He was on non-GMO boards. Actually, I didn't know this going into it. And the first time he read through it, this was the harshest criticism I've ever got in my life. He said, if you would have been paying me to read this, I would have stopped at page 40. I was like, are you serious? Why? He's like, you were just throwing red meat to people that agreed with you. He's like, your tone, what you need is, if you want to hit people like me that you want to actually have an influence on, the tone needs to be a little bit different. So he was talking about the story, how we tell the story better. And so we worked on that a lot. And by the end of it, he said, this is probably one of the most important books I've worked on. You have changed my mind, and it is going to be different. I do approach the grocery store differently. And so that is the ideal audience, so that we are educating, but in a way that's conversational, and we're not going over the heads of people with all of the science. We actually bring it down to a kitchen table conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with all that. The point is, it's peeling back the labels, organics, non-GMOs, and our sustainable path to feed the planet. And you obviously are pro modern agriculture, but you
Yes.
don't come out and just start saying, if you don't believe in modern agriculture, you're a dumbass. I appreciate all that. Okay, I got to hear about our thoughts, yours,
Yes.
mine, about movements
Yes.
and where this thing with. I want to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. because before I hit record, you actually brought it up. And you and I really have some concerns about when movements have passion,
Yep.
funding, and political power. We use DPA and the DDT and the EPA and the bald eagle as our first example. I'm concerned about some of the outcomes that might happen if Robert F. Kennedy Jr., as we are now seeing, and we're recording this in mid-October, in the last couple of weeks, since he tossed his endorsements to Trump, he's been now putting out there that he might be joining or in charge of the United States Department of Agriculture. So that's a big concern. Before I get to that, Josh, I want to talk about Redox Bionutrients. They have been a business partner of mine. I got their hat standing right back here in my background. See, that's their cool logo. If you're a Midwest corn, soybean, and wheat grower, the evolution of agronomic strategy from Redox Bionutrients is a new way of thinking of getting more with less. Very important right now, given the agricultural economics, when we're producing crops at about the cost of production for what you're going to sell them for at the elevator, or maybe even worse than that. So you can get more with less through ultra-efficient plant nutrition and superior biostimulants. Redox is a family-owned and operated business out of Burley, Idaho, with 30 years of success throughout the United States and abroad. They started out in specialty crop, then went to turf, and now are going more and more to broad acre. You really ought to check this out. Their Pathway program combines flagship products like Mainstay SI and Banks with breakthrough nitrogen optimization. Nitrogen is in the crosshairs. Trust me, you're going to want to figure out a way to use less of it. Nitrogen optimization through their new RDXN technology. You can find out more and you can get detailed information and agronomic contacts at redoxgrows.com/Midwest. Redoxgrows.com/Midwest. Go check it out. All right. You and I are both concerned.
Yeah.
Talk to me.
So there's always hesitancy in this because, I can certainly agree with politics of people. And I think if you're on the conservative side of things, you were excited when you first heard that RFK was going to throw his weight and support behind Donald Trump because, we might be looking forward to a change from what we've had these past couple of years to going back to what it was before the pandemic. But with that, I don't think that we should accept anybody just for everything that they say just because we like one thing that they say or one thing that they stand for. I think we should be critical of everybody, honestly, about what especially our politicians, especially those that say that they're going to represent us. And that's one of the concerns I have with RFK Jr. is he's been a very strong advocate, proponent, I'd say activist for what he considers environmental rights for a very long time. Mm-hmm. He's also really known for his fight against vaccines. He's really come on the stage big time with COVID, talking about vaccines. And he, I think he says a lot of really good things a lot of times, but he also, I'm wary about where he's going to go with certain things. I think we all need to be aware of that because if he is to get in, and farmers are really excited because now Trump's in, we've got RFK in there too. We need to have our eyes wide open and really looking at what is going to be happening. Luckily, government moves slow, so hopefully nothing radically happens right away. But this is what we need to talk about here the rest of this time, in my mind, is what does RFK think about agriculture?
All right. Well, first off, you said government moves slow. Thank goodness. That's not always the case, and you're closer to it. You're living in Maryland. This Biden administration came in and tossed $1.7 trillion out the door at their pet projects in a heartbeat, and they'd done a couple $1 trillion before that in a infrastructure project, none of which actually, much of which never made a highway. It was all graft. So I'm concerned about that. Okay. RFK Jr., I keep up. I read. I read a Wall Street Journal. I try to surf around on different media outlets, even the ones I disagree with. I just saw the interview with Rachel Maddow and Mark Cuban, where Mark Cuban looks like he's a woman, an old librarian woman with his spectacles on. So I try to keep up with different sources. RFK Jr. is not somebody that I would have necessarily agreed with. He does point out, as did I, some of the COVID vaccine issue was a lot of money, like literally more money than you and I can even calculate, and we're both fairly sharp guys, tossed at these pharmaceutical companies, and a lot of there was a dearth of research. There was a shortage of science, if you will, and I can see being critical of that. Not to mention the National Institutes for Health, the Centers for Disease Control, got a lot of money and made a lot of statements that we know now not to be true. I'm with, okay, RFK Jr., I can get behind that. Yep. Then RFK Jr. says, and these factory farms, industrial agriculture is, oh, he talks like this. It makes me sound like a soprano because he talks like this. And he says, and these factory farms, they're killing. And he says that they're bad for the environment. And the reality is, when we get more efficient at caloric production, we generally also, not even generally, almost without exception, we use less natural resources per calorie produced. Correct. That's the case on the cornfield behind my house. It's the case at the dairy farm that I do business with, compared to the dairy farm I was raised on 40, 50 years ago. So his mission is misguided.
Yeah, and I always hate to instill some motive behind somebody. I don't know what's in their head, and I honestly think that he has good intentions a lot of times. But I think the worldview from listening to him, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast and got a lot of views on that. So he spoke for 3 hours, and I actually listened to the entire thing. I've listened to a lot of his interviews. You listen to the way he starts off those conversations. He got started off in the water keepers. Like he was an environmental guy. He wanted to come out, but he starts off by saying, I sued this guy. I sued this guy. I sued this guy. This polluter, this polluter, this polluter. In his worldview, what I see is that there's always a good guy and a bad guy. There's always a good guy and a bad guy. And I don't think that's necessarily how the world has to work. I thought I was a conspiracy theorist and very critical of the world in general until I listened to RFK Jr., because everybody is a bad guy or a good guy. You're either doing wrong or we're not just all working together to improve our current situation, right? He was the one that sued Monsanto over glyphosate. Like, he was the first one. Him and his law firm were the ones that first took this fight to agriculture to try to shut down one of the chemicals that helps us work. So he is the guy that has been responsible for attacking agriculture already. He's listing chemicals on his podcast or on Joe Rogan, atrazine, neonicotinoids. He's coming after all these, and he has said it plainly. He wants to throw the weight of every administrative force that he has at these things to change us into an organic, regenerative farming system.
Okay, hang on. Let the person that's viewing my show that didn't catch Joe Rogan's 3-hour RFK interview think through that. Yeah. This man who is a Kennedy, an heir to an ill-gotten fortune, in case you don't know, look it up. Well, if you can find the truth, old man Kennedy, Pat, whatever the hell his name was a bootlegger who bought political favor, and so that he could continue to be ill-gotten family money. This guy's an heir to it. Obviously leans left pretty hard, but also maybe not as hard as the current left. He's more leans the same direction that a lot of his lineage did, from his father, who was assassinated or shot, to his uncle, whatever. And he can have his opinions, he can have his beliefs, and he can go out there and fight the good fight. The problem is he's fighting the wrong fight. Like you said, he used his backing and his name and his clout to go after Monsanto. You could say the march against Monsanto has a hell of a lot of origin with RFK Jr.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know any other way to put it other than that's scary. He finds a boogeyman, and the thing that he does really well is I watch him on 1.5 speed. So like it actually sounds a little better, but he's really good at seeing facts and figures and numbers way better than I am at these things. And he's got them all there to rattle off. So it sounds like he knows exactly what he's talking about, but he does cherry pick what he looks at. I mean, he says he came into the suit against Monsanto, and it wouldn't have been brought up unless he had a reasonable case at him because it met this one criteria. So he had enough data. And I mean, they're not going to rule against Monsanto if there's not the data there. Well, it was a California court. It was it was super left leaning. Every case against Monsanto that's been settled is in California, where, like you talk about left and right politics, that is where the non-GMO, the organic, everything is heavily predominant. And that's where they're winning these cases and setting precedent at that point. So I don't take that at face value. I think that the case was a sham.
Yep.
I think that the ruling was a sham. They're settling for billions of dollars, just to Monsanto did. I mean, Monsanto's not even around anymore. So like, we don't need to talk about them anymore, even though he still talks about Monsanto because that was his big win.
He talks about Monsanto. Here's the thing. By the way, Dr. Josh Miller, and by the way, if somehow you didn't hear this beginning, he's the author of Peeling Back the Labels, and he's talking about a lot of ag stuff, and he's a non-ag guy that came to our industry after getting several advanced degrees, and we appreciate people like you join our industry. He's still, meaning RFK Jr., and activists learn, and I tell my ag crowds this all the time, they learn buzzwords that work. I mean, this is not a damn accident. They know that words like factory farm, industrial agriculture, and Monsanto just create emotion and evoke emotional responses. And they know they don't have, like you said, they know they are not, if they were trying to evoke logic, it would be different. They're evoking, and all human decisions are made with emotion, then sometimes backed with logic. I have to tell my ag people that all the time also. Again, why you shouldn't use science. You won't win an argument with science. Very purposefully, they went to California, where the public has been programmed for decades to be anti-Monsanto, anti-modern agriculture, and not all of agriculture, certainly not, or not all of California, certainly not down in the San Joaquin Valley, but where did they make the lawsuit? In San Francisco, for God's sakes. So you've already got, you're playing, it's not just a home field advantage, it's a goddamn home it's a home court advantage. It's a home court times 10 advantage. But as you say, they still use the word Monsanto. Monsanto's been sold to Bayer now for almost a decade. Why do they still use Monsanto? Because it's all you have to do. It's that easy to evoke the emotion. And they know that it's not a scientific argument.
Yeah, so that's where he was. That's what he still keeps bringing up. He still is talking about it. And here's what he has said. He's got on a crusade against chronic health issues, which he says are prevalent in the U.S. more than any other country. He talks about autism all the time. And like I said, there are some things that I think that he has some points on, but not everything. We have to be critical about people about when they have opinions. We can agree with some and not agree with others. That's allowed. That's really what our country is supposed to be built on, is that we don't have to take everybody at face value. So he says, yes, we need to reduce ultra-processed foods. I think there's a lot of validity in trying to have a more wholesome diet of whole foods. That means like actual vegetables and actual fruits and not getting everything out of a wrapper, that's been processed. I think there's some validity to that. But then he goes right into it. We need to get rid of toxic chemicals. And toxic chemicals already, okay, well, now I know you're using science because you use the word toxic chemicals. You're not trying to instill fear in me at all, right?
Yeah.
And it's in the pesticides in our food. It's in the microplastics, in the vaccines. It's in medicine. It's in everything. So he's got about 16 different things, in his bullseye that says he says cause these chronic health issues. So if one falls off and it doesn't, well, that one didn't pan out. Well, he's still got 15 other ones that he can target. So pesticides are still in his target right now. He has said he wants to set back 80 years of regulation, of farm legislation, industry legislation in this industry, so that we can go back into an organic regenerative farming model. Get rid of the factory farms, whatever that means. Get rid of, he used the word carbon fertilizers. I don't think he knows what that means, because that would mean like maybe organic fertilizers. I don't know. I think he's mistaken because he doesn't really understand this industry. He wants to do good. He thinks that kids are getting sick, and he wants to try to fight something because everything's a good guy versus a bad guy. The fight is just, it's wrong-headed right now.
Mm-hmm. First off, he's missed. If he was a media guy, which he kind of is, he would use the word conflate, because remember, whenever like a talking head states something that is unfactual, they then say, I conflated. And I actually remember the first time I heard that like 13 years ago, I had to look it up and say, what the hell is conflate? I know what deflate is. I know what inflate is. What's conflate? So I had to look it up. Anyway, You're having a good time today, aren't you, Dr. Josh? This is the most fun you've ever had on a podcast.
Yes, this is a good time. I encourage everybody to jump on to Damian's podcast if you're ever invited. This is fun.
You're talking about him misstating or conflating, if I'm sure he would say it, what carbon fertilizer is. He's probably trying to say synthetic fertilizer, which a lot of times then has its derivatives from fossil fuel type products or whatever. But the point is, he's got a lot of things wrong. For instance, I have heard soundbite of him saying, and we can take care of all this diabetes. We do have diabetes increases. Some of it's because we're better at testing, but the big underlying thing is sugar consumption and obesity. We're at like about 11% of our population is diabetic, most of it type 2, which means adult onset, as we used to call it, which means you got obese and you stop moving and now your circulation sucks, and it goes right to obesity and sugar consumption. But then he says, and we could do this, we could cure kids of diabetes if we just switch to organic food. And you say, there's no evidence of any of this. I could eat organic candy and still be a fat diabetic. I can eat organically produced ice cream and be 300 pounds overweight and be diabetic. So he just says a lot of things, and it's again, is it misguided because he doesn't know, or is it misguided because he knows that's what makes the movement? And I think it's a bit like the Rachel Carson, going back to Silent Spring. They know what moves the emotive needle in human behavior.
Yeah, I'm always hesitant to impute motive on people because I don't know. I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And it goes back to, was it George R.R. Martin says that everybody's the hero in their own story. So I tend to think that people think they're doing good, but you can still be misguided in what you're trying to do. And I think that's where we are, because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think it's misguided. And
hang on, I want you to hold on to that thought. I want you to hold on that thought, and then I want to ask you what concerns you the most about an RFK being in charge of the USDA, because I've got a list about of 4 things. But anyway, before I do that, remember Truterra, ladies and gentlemen, is one of my sponsors. They've been around for a while, and I want to make sure you check out Truterra. They are focused on supporting farmers at every stage of the sustainability journey to help plan, make, and maintain regenerative management practices. You know what? We're not talking about tree hugger stuff here. We're just talking about reducing your tillage. Maybe you go to a strip till system. Maybe you go to a product that reduces your nitrogen. It's stuff that's good for your soil, good for your bottom line because you're using less inputs, and also it can help you sign up for a sustainability program. Production agriculture is going to be 40% off of where we were 2 years ago in terms of farm revenue. Why not figure out a way to pick up some new farm revenue with the sustainability program? Truterra can help you do that. Go to truterraag.com/enroll. Truterra, Truterra, ag.com/enroll. They are part of Land O'Lakes, the cooperative that's been around for more than 100 years. Check it out. Check out Truterra. What concerns you about RFK? He's got a video that's all over social media, standing in front of the United States Department of Agriculture building in Washington, D.C., saying, if you vote for Trump in November, I'll be taking over this agency. He promises it, and he talks about a bunch of things he's going to change. What concerns you?
Well, first off, I want to, that last ad that you just gave, kind of, I don't know. I'm glad you had that ad, because you had regenerative, and we said the word regenerative like 2 or 3 times now. My biggest problem is that for some reason, farmers have been made to either be a bad guy or a dunce that doesn't know what they're doing.
Yep.
And that's not the case. I've worked with farmers. They're not out there throwing chemicals and fertilizer all over the place because they have excess money. You've talked about the economy, the economics of farming a couple of times now, and farmers are trying to do the best they can with what they have, and they're always improving. And also, the land is their biggest asset that they have. The soils are the biggest asset they have because that is where they generate the revenue from. No farmer is out there thinking how they can rape and pillage their soils so that they're not going to be in business in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's wrongheaded for us to continue to either paint farmers as either bad because they don't care about the environment. They're probably the best environmentalists that are out there for us, or that they're just so dumb that they can't figure out what the right thing is to do. So we need somebody in government to tell them what to do. And that's going to lead into what my biggest fears are, because then the government is going to step in and tell them what they need to do. I don't know if you have anything to say. Sorry, that just kind of came from that last advertising you had there and got me thinking about that.
Yeah. So I agree with all that. And by the way, I even prefaced it when I said Truterra has been my business partner here for a while. We're not talking about tree huggy. We all have to switch to walking around in our bare feet and cow manure and our some sort of hippie commune thing. We're just talking about a sustainability program where you're reducing some things, and thereby you can get some sustainability money, and it's out there. But anyway, that's not what I'm asking. What scares you about? I'll tell you what concerns me about RFK Jr. if he's in charge of USDA. I already said it. He's got this push to organic. I'm fine with organic. I mean, I am. It's a business model. You can get higher margins. I've got a friend that only lives 10 miles from here. He didn't come into the thing with a lot of capital or inherited assets. So he said, I had to become an organic farmer because I can make more per acre with more intensive management and doing the organic things. He gets a premium. He's not doing it because he's a zealot. He's doing it because of the business. I like it for those reasons. But RFK Jr. believes, or whether he believes it or not, it's activism. It's activism against agricultural innovation that bothers me.
Yes. And regulation over letting the free market and the natural way of doing business evolve to that point, because we're always trying to innovate. Farmers are trying to figure out how to use less to get more. Companies are trying to figure out how to do more with less. We're all trying to do that already. So just having some agency, which is the biggest fear, is these agents are going to tell you what you can do. It's already happening. So I'm in Maryland. I used to sell fertilizer and chemicals directly to farmers here. We're in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Mm-hmm. It is the most protected watershed and waterway in the whole country. And it is unbearable to farm in this watershed because of the regulations that are put on people, not by people that have any experience in farming, but by people that think they know what's best.
People like
our land use, right? The land use is getting more and more urban because people are moving here. We're getting less and less agriculture, but we're having to do more with the less land. So what happened? I'll just give you some examples here in Maryland, real quick. They say that you can't put fertilizer out during certain times of the year because it could run off. Well, you've got dairy farmers, they need to empty their manure pits. All right. It has to go somewhere. You have manure piling up because you have animals, and you want to use manure because it's organic fertilizer. Farmers are having to ship it out of state because they can't apply it onto their fields during certain times of the year, even though they have wheat growing, which would take up the fertilizer. Never mind the science, you can't use it. Cover crops are a big thing. I'm a big advocate of cover crops. In Maryland, they wanted to make it a program. They want to pay you because it's always better if it comes from the government. So they want to pay you to use cover crops. Well, what happens? The farmers put the cover crops in at the lowest rate at the last possible day that they could put it in to get all the money that they were going to get from the government. Pennsylvania wasn't getting the money. We just saw it as a benefit to using cover crops. So we learned what cover crops work best. When was the right time to put them in? How to incorporate them? How to use them? And those farmers were using them effectively, getting better results from the crop and getting better environmental results from the runoff that was coming off those versus the Maryland farmers that were using it just because it was a government program. Government is not the answer in these things because they're like you said, it's an ideology. They think that this needs to happen. So this is what they want to put in place to force everybody to do it.
Yep.
And it does not go well.
What about, I agree. So RFK Jr. in his ad that, again, I said, and I've invited them on Twitter starting yesterday. I said, I want you to come on Business of Agriculture show, and I'm sharing with his people. I'm doubting that they will, but I desperately want them to come on because I'm an ag guy. RFK Jr., you're not. And I've been around this my whole life, and I've got a degree in agricultural economics. You don't. You've got experience suing one of the big six agricultural chemical companies, and you've got activism on your side. When he says repeatedly about the movement against factory farms, does that mean the United States Department of Agriculture's new policy is going to be putting them out of business? That's what I'm concerned about. What is the answer here, RFK Jr.? Or is it going to be creating a bunch of federal money giveaways where we give money to a person with 3 acres of organic arugula, and because we believe that that's the future, then we're taking a bunch of taxpayer monies and funding things that are essentially unfeasible.
Mm-hmm.
Your thought?
Yeah. No, my thoughts on that are, this is something I wrote about. You said it, and I agree with you. There's nothing wrong with organics. If I were getting into farming today, I'd probably have organic farming because the business just makes sense. Because you make more money at doing that. However, the realities of it, that we do live in a real world, and the real world is that you cannot produce as much through organic practices currently. That's why we are trying to improve all the time through our current practices to use the best technologies available to us, to reduce the amount of fertilizer that we need to use because we use it more effectively in better forms of it, to use less chemicals because they're better, they're more selective, we use them at the right times, and we're getting more crop and off of every acre. We're using the cover crops, we're reducing tillage, we're doing things. We're very environmentally minded, but also production minded, so that we get the most out of it. Right. When you come in and start to legislate it, it's not going to work. I mean, there's no other way to put it than it's not going to work. You tell everybody that they have to farm organically tomorrow. I don't know what that world looks like. I honestly can't imagine what that world looks like, because overnight you're going to reduce it. We actually do know what it looks like, actually. Let me back up. Sri Lanka in 2021. Yeah. This actually happened. We have a model for this. 2021, Sri Lanka, the president said, we are going to be organic. No more synthetic fertilizers, no more chemicals. And the crops dropped that year precipitously. The economy went to tatters, and he was forced to flee the country because there was revolt, because the economy went to nothing. So we actually do know exactly what would happen. I don't know.
The problem is, it's not because either of us are against organic. Let the marketplace sort this out. Like my buddy Andy over here, who's an organic farmer because of the economics of it, et cetera. It works for his system. The point is, top-down legislated organic is kind of like what they're doing in the European Union. First off, you get farmer revolts. You also get, it looks to me like grabs of land because they're using the environment. So does that mean that RFK Jr. is actually not really as much of a zealot? Is it true? Maybe it's what's going on in the European Union, Josh, is we're going to pretend it's about environmentalism and take this farm away under the guise of, well, you're releasing too much nitrous oxide with your dairy manure pits. Oh, wait. My friend, the developer, would like that 200 acres and build apartments. Oh, yes, it was all about environmentalism. Then it opens up the door for so much backhanded government corruption of we're pretending it's about organic or what. And as you said, to Sri Lanka's point, it wreaks havoc with the economy, and it might cause some goddamn food shortages along the way. Absolutely. That's not usually good for anybody.
No, that's where this whole, I mean, we didn't get into ESG, but that's really the outgrowth of all this. The environmental sustainability and governance movement is where that happens. We're starting to put investment funds around companies that meet certain criteria that have been set, and we're not going to get into that one today. But I do think it's important that, listen, I'm nobody. I'm not.
It's not true. Wait a minute. Dr. Josh Miller here, multiple degrees, peeling back the labels. I'm holding your book. Anyway, let's go back to the things that concern you about an RFK Jr. being in charge of USDA. I just said, is it forcible shutdown of modern agriculture? Does it mean my dairyman, that, by the way, produces 85 pounds of milk per cow per day? 40 years ago on the Mason dairy farm, we produced 50. He's doing it with less natural resource consumption per pound of milk produced, with I can go on and on. You know, they like, well, these modern farms, these factory farms, they don't take good care of the animals. I said, bullshit. I can take you back to what our cow treatment, what our protocols were versus these modern facilities. The hogs in the hog buildings are in better condition than they were 40 years ago. The environmental stewardship, the protocols, the nutrient management plans that they have to, I can't say enough how, if RFK Jr. likes to eat organic food because he can afford it, because he's third generation trust fund from ill-gotten Kennedy era money, fine for you. But that doesn't mean you have the right to impose a food system onto an entire populace.
Yeah. Like, best case scenario, you're wasting taxpayer dollars, like you were with the Maryland Chesapeake Bay watershed examples I gave earlier. You're wasting taxpayer dollars to make farmers do something because you think it's the right thing to do. Next, you're actually forcing people to do things that make the cost of production go up. And now cost of production is passed down through everybody, and it makes everybody's food more expensive. Worst case scenario, if you want everybody to do this, it will be a Sri Lanka. I don't want to be a super alarmist here with this, but it has been tried. I don't know how else to say it. It has been tried. It's been done, and it resulted in economic collapse and the president having to flee the country. Yeah. And so that is the worst case scenario in all this. And And if we're not careful, this isn't a I don't know how I want to say it. I still think that economic growth and potential of a Trump presidency is going to be great for the country. I think that what we need to be aware of, especially the agriculture is very conservative and right leaning, is that what baggage comes along with that. We need to have eyes wide open and be ready to fight what could come along with what we see as an overall good thing with the Trump presidency.
Okay, I'm gonna throw another one out there about if this happens and if RFK Jr. is somehow in charge of the USDA. He said he wants to change the dietary guidelines, and that's been instituted since I think it was 1981 or two under the Reagan administration. The first dietary guidelines came out. Now, the government had been telling its citizens what to eat prior to that. I covered it in my book Food Fear, where we talk about back in the 1940s, they even had 7 or 9 food categories, and one of them was butter. Its own category. Awesome. Anyway, but it got ramped up, and then the academics got involved. And you're talking about academics that lean a certain way politically from places like Tufts University in Boston, and they were deciding what America needed to eat. And because the professor at Tufts was a vegan, she very strongly then says we need to have more vegan, and it became very politically motivated. Just as a point of reference, we've gone from low double-digit obesity 40 years ago to 42% obesity. So since the dietary guidelines were instituted 40 years ago, we've about 4 times obesity rates, not to mention 10 to 11 times the diabetes rates. So when RFK Jr. says it's time to change the dietary guidelines, I'd say it's time to eliminate. He says change. I think it's just more of, again, the Tufts University activism. Now the dietary guidelines are vegan, organic, whatever.
Well, it goes to worldviews too. I mean, I don't want to get philosophical here, but I feel like I know what's best for my family and I want to make my own decisions. But we somehow, a lot of our population thinks that we need some big brother, some big government telling us what's best to do. And if they don't tell us, we're not going to know what to do. I do think it's time for government to get smaller, but we also, want world peace. So probably not going to happen. But in the meantime, I think we need to know what it could look like. I'm not saying there's any guarantees in this, but on RFK or on Joe Rogan's podcast, RFK said that he's been saying all these things for 18 years and nobody has debated him. Nobody's willing to debate him. That's what I was going to say. I don't know who I am. I'm nobody. I don't have a Kennedy last name, but I would love to have a conversation with him about this and push back and challenge and see where his mind is on these things. I think somebody needs to have a conversation from the food industry, from the agricultural industry, to have a real conversation with him so people can hear that. Joe Rogan's not in agriculture, and I don't expect him to be, but it was very interesting. Kennedy will say one study, he cites one study, and his producer Jamie throws up on the screen. They look at it and they're like, "Oh yeah, look, right there's a study you referenced. It's real." That's not a way to debate. So I think that he needs to.
Yeah, well, I'm not even. Josh, I'm not even framing it as a debate. I'm framing it as an interview. I want to hear what you're going to do, because I truly believe, as you and I teed it up, I think you're going to do a lot to set back agricultural innovation by 70 years. Okay, we talked about herbicides. He doesn't seem to understand. Again, he conflates. He calls everything a pesticide, a herbicide, and insecticide. I mean, everything is a pesticide. Pesticide. Anyway, sounds like he drank a couple of. I think he drank a couple of shots of it. And that's what's wrong with his voice. But here's the thing: maybe too much atrazine shots. But anyway, here's what I'm concerned about is. Talk about baby in the bathwater, tossing out the baby with the bathwater. There's a hell of a lot that you can say, yeah, we've done some things that are not great for the soil. We've allowed some erosion. Yeah, we've done some sins. We've got some sins, and we can handle that. But we've also done a hell of a lot of good things in agriculture. You know, our natural resource consumption per calorie produced is the lowest it's ever been in the history of humanity. You know, our production abundance, our affordability, our safety. The United States Department of Agriculture, which was signed into law under Abraham Lincoln, was set up to create affordable, safe, and abundant food for a growing nation. And we have achieved that. Okay, could the USDA be refined? Absolutely. But I'm concerned that activists, when you activists in the House, it upsets a really big track record of success.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't even know how to say it any better than that. It's troubling. It's troubling about what could be, and all we can do right now is talk about what could be. I think that's all we're trying to do, or at least all I wanted to talk about here, is that everybody should have their eyes open all the time and not just accept things at face value. I like Trump's economic plan, immigration plan. Okay. I don't have to like him handing over the USDA to RFK Jr. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, we need to be very aware that we're going to have a fight on our hands in agriculture, because things could go, if he is true to his word, not great. It's really going to upset the apple cart of what we're used to doing. And
Josh, just think about it this way. What if he says, well, I can't require organic, but here's what I can do. For you to participate in our crop insurance program that the United States Department of Agriculture subsidizes to keep our farms financially solvent so we have a reliable food supply. That's the justification for our crop insurance program. I can't mandate organic, but here's what I can do. For you to qualify for crop insurance subsidy, you have to be organic. Well, all of a sudden, the trillions of dollars of on-farm capital that's deployed, and a bunch of times your banks won't loan you an operating loan if you're not crop insured. That right there is probably the biggest fear factor, if that's even something that the Secretary of Agriculture could do.
Yeah. And you're the best thing you said in this whole thing. I mean, you said a lot of good things. Sorry. you said good things there, but we're left with just speculating about what he wants to do. He said a lot of things that are transformative type things. We need him to explain what that looks like. Yeah. Because right now we can imagine the worst, because his language is the worst. Like we're imagining what he's saying and taking at face value. I don't know, man. I don't know. I get anxious. I get anxious with the thought about what this could be, and what farmers are going to be up against. We're making tremendous strides all the time.
From an economic and environmental stance, we're already on our farms. Look at my work with the extreme ag guys, like our friend Kelly Garrett. He's using less nitrogen per bushel of corn produced than he ever has. And they're doing reduced till practices and no-till practices. We're already doing those things, and it's because of marketplace economics. The heavy hand of USDA policy, if it's under RFK Jr., it forces moves that are already, it forces us to do things that many are already doing, as you pointed out, and also it becomes, I guess I'm too much of a history student. Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward killed 60 million Chinese, and part of that involved agriculture and a move to collectivization. Well, 60 million humans starved to death. So I get very concerned. Oh, are you saying RFK Jr. is going to starve us? No, I'm telling you that history of huge social movement derived legislative action has starved people. Look it up. Collectivization in the Mao Zedong Great Leap Forward, collectivization in the Soviet Union. These large movements have caused massive amounts of misery.
Yeah, and what you said there with our friend like Kelly Garrett, we're already moving that direction. It's like the DDT; it was already on its way out.
Yeah,
but we had to get government involved to like squash it, which actually just prevented the use of it in small, limited cases moving forward. Here, we're already moving that way. Why do you want to continue to squeeze the farmer when they're already doing most of the things that you want them to do naturally? There are things that we can do too. I think that there's opportunities for us to look at subsidies and things like that. We're very set up as a country to grow corn and beans and wheat. And are there ways to incentivize farmers to not grow commodities but have value-based? Look at the protein in the soybeans and put more value within these crops. There are lots of things that we can do to increase value of the crops and increase quality of crops and things like that we haven't touched on yet. But this isn't the direction forward. It's not saying, hey, you're already doing an amazing job increasing or bettering your environmental footprint, increasing production per acre and per resource used. We're already doing a great job of that. We're just going to stomp on you to tell you that you need to do it better, even though you're already doing it there are things we can do, just not this. I don't know, just not this.
That's a fantastic way. I think we should wrap it up. What frightens me is the heavy hand of government. Yeah. Can we point out that, like you said, government policy has really been a little outdated, that, yeah, it's subsidizing the overproduction of some commodities that we already are in oversupply. Yeah. Can we tweak some of that? Yes. But wholesale throwing a baby out with the bathwater and forcing organic or any of these other things that, if you pay attention. So anyway, thanks for being on here, buddy.
Yeah. I hope you get RFK on soon.
I do too.
I can't wait to hear it.
His name is Dr. Josh Miller. He's got a whole bunch of degrees after his name. He wrote a book called Peeling Back the Labels. You can check it out. If somebody wants to pick up your book, where do they find it?
Oh, you can go to Amazon.
Go to Amazon, Peeling Back the Labels by Dr. Josh Miller. I think he's going to be back on the show because I liked having him on. By the way, remember my friends at Land O'Lakes, or Truterra, I should say, and Redox. They help make this show possible, and also Pattern Ag, my 3 sponsors. So help them out. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. Share this episode with someone who can benefit from it, and leave a comment, or also give me a rating anywhere where you get your podcast. Go in there and leave me a review, because it'll help more people find this podcast. Till next time. Thanks for being here, Josh.
Hey, thank Damian.
Till next time, I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by Pattern Ag. Everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right, Pattern Ag can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can preemptively, proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.